Velthari pressed his three-fingered hand against the observation window of the massive Nexari warship Eternal Dominion. The stars looked the same as always, cold points of light scattered across the black void. But today felt different. Today they had found something new. Another primitive species, High Counselor Morden announced from behind him. The tall Nexari leader's voice carried the same bored tone he used for all such discoveries. 48 civilizations we have brought into our coalition. This will be 49. Velthari turned from the window. As a junior diplomat, he rarely spoke during these meetings. But curiosity got the better of him. What do we know about them? Ambassador Kethvar, the senior diplomat, waved a dismissive hand. Very little. They call themselves humans. They have a few small colonies scattered around this sector. Their technology appears basic. Their ships are tiny compared to ours. The bridge erupted in soft chatter as the tactical displays showed the human vessel approaching. Velthari stared at the image on the main screen. The human ship was indeed small, maybe a tenth the size of their flagship. Its hull looked rough, almost crude. Compared to the smooth, elegant lines of Nexari vessels, it seemed like something built in a hurry. Incoming transmission, the communications officer announced. Put it through, Morden commanded. The face that appeared on screen surprised Velthari. The human looked young, maybe middle-aged by their standards. He had dark hair and calm brown eyes. His uniform was simple, practical. Nothing fancy or decorated like Nexari military dress. This is Captain Lee Taman of the human exploration vessel Aegis Dawn, the human said. His voice was steady, polite. We request peaceful contact and dialogue. Morden leaned back in his command chair. I am High Counselor Morden of the Nexari Coalition. You have entered our space. Our apologies, Captain Lee replied without hesitation. We were not aware this system was claimed. We are exploring this region for the first time. How many worlds do your people control? Ambassador Kethvar asked. Captain Lee paused for a moment. We have settlements on several worlds in nearby systems. Nothing as grand as your coalition, I'm sure. Velthari noticed something odd about the human's answer. It was true technically, but it felt incomplete, like someone answering a question while leaving out important details. We will need to discuss terms for your integration into our coalition, Morden said. All species in this region fall under our protection and guidance. We would welcome discussions, Captain Lee said. Perhaps we could arrange a cultural exchange first, to better understand each other. Kethvar looked annoyed. That is unnecessary. Our terms are standard, but Morden held up a hand. A cultural exchange could be educational, very well. We will allow 30 days for your people to learn about the benefits of joining our coalition. Thank you, Captain Lee said. We look forward to learning more about your civilization. The transmission ended. Velthari stared at the blank screen, thinking about the human captain's tone. There had been something in his voice. Not fear, not excitement, almost like sadness. Velthari, Ambassador Kethvar called out. You will serve as our cultural observer. Spend time on their ship. Learn about these humans. Report back on their level of development. Yes, Ambassador, Velthari replied. 2 hours later, Velthari found himself in a small shuttle heading toward the human vessel. As they got closer, he could see more details of the ship's construction. The hull was definitely rough, with what looked like repair patches in several places. The humans either couldn't afford better materials, or they were constantly fixing damage. The docking bay was tiny compared to Nexari standards. As Velthari stepped out of his shuttle, he was greeted by a human woman in a medical uniform. Welcome aboard the Aegis Dawn, she said with a warm smile. I'm Dr. Park So-jin, Chief Medical Officer. Captain Lee asked me to show you around. Dr. Park was shorter than the captain, with kind eyes and gentle hands. She moved with the confidence of someone used to helping others. As they walked through the ship's corridors, Velthari noticed how clean everything was despite the rough appearance. Your ship seems well used, he commented carefully. Dr. Park laughed. That's a polite way to put it. We've been in space for 8 months on this mission. Things get worn down, but our engineer Kim Woo-bin keeps everything running perfectly. They passed through what appeared to be the medical bay. Velthari was surprised by how advanced the equipment looked. Some of it seemed more sophisticated than what he had seen on Nexari ships. Your medical technology appears quite developed, he observed. We've had to learn to treat a wide variety of injuries and conditions, Dr. Park replied. Something in her tone made Velthari look at her more closely. There was experience in her voice. The kind that comes from dealing with serious emergencies. What kind of injuries? He asked. All sorts, she said simply. Burns, fractures, trauma wounds, radiation exposure. When you're exploring unknown space, you have to be ready for anything. They continued the tour, meeting other crew members. Engineer Kim Woobin was working on something that involved controlled explosions. When Velthari asked about it, Kim explained it was for mining operations. We use precise charges to extract materials from asteroids, Kim said. It's much more efficient than traditional methods. Velthari watched Kim work. The human's hands moved with practiced skill, placing small devices with mathematical precision. Each explosive was carefully calculated for maximum effect. It was impressive but also slightly concerning. The same skills used for mining could be adapted for other purposes. Lieutenant Choi Yu-na, the tactical officer, showed him the ship's defensive systems. They seemed basic compared to Nexari weapons, but Yuna explained them with the confidence of someone who had used them before. Have you been in combat? Velthari asked. We've encountered some hostile wildlife on unexplored worlds, Yuna replied, and occasionally pirates or raiders. Nothing too serious. Again, that feeling of incomplete answers. These humans spoke casually about violence, like it was just another part of life. During the evening meal, Velthari sat with several crew members in their small dining area. The conversation was relaxed, friendly, but he noticed things. Private Bei Jin-ho, a young Marine, mentioned small conflicts back home with the same tone someone might use to discuss bad weather. What kind of conflicts? Velthari asked. Oh, just the usual, Bei replied. Border disputes, resource wars, ideological differences. Nothing that lasted more than a few years. Dr. Park nodded. The Seoul incident was probably the worst in recent memory. Nearly 3 million casualties. 3 million? Velthari was shocked. That's a significant conflict. The humans around the table looked at him with mild surprise. Really? Captain Lee asked, joining the conversation. That's considered a minor regional conflict by our standards. World War III had casualties in the hundreds of millions. Velthari felt a chill run through his body. These humans spoke about massive warfare like it was normal history. How many wars had they fought? How many of their own people had they killed? But surely such conflicts are rare now, he asked hopefully. Oh yes, Dr. Park said. We've been mostly peaceful for almost 30 years. Just occasional small disputes. Small disputes that killed millions. Velthari began to understand that human definitions of small might be very different from everyone else's. Over the following days, he learned more about human history. They shared stories freely, often with dark humor. They talked about ice ages that nearly wiped them out, plagues that killed half their population, wars that lasted decades. They spoke of creatures on their homeworld that could kill humans with ease, and how humans had hunted most of them to extinction anyway. Your species survived all of this? Velthari asked during one conversation. Survived and thrived, Engineer Kim said proudly. Humans are very good at adapting, and we're excellent at learning from our enemies. Learning what? How to beat them, Private Bei said simply. On the 10th day, Velthari made a disturbing discovery. He had been given access to the ship's database to learn about human culture. While browsing their entertainment files, he found something called military training videos. Curious, he watched one. It showed humans practicing combat techniques. But these weren't the simple fighting methods he expected from a primitive species. These were sophisticated martial arts, advanced tactical procedures, complex weapons handling. The humans moved with deadly grace like predators who had perfected the art of killing. When he asked Dr. Park about it, she seemed surprised by his concern. Every human learns basic self-defense, she said, and most of us serve in the military for at least a few years. It's considered part of growing up. All humans have military training? Well, not all. Maybe only 90% or so. 90%. Velthari tried to imagine a species where nearly everyone was trained for war. Among the Nexari, only a small professional military class learned combat skills. On the 15th day, Captain Lee showed him images of human worlds. What Velthari saw shocked him. These weren't the small, primitive settlements he had expected. These were massive cities with billions of inhabitants, advanced transportation networks, industrial complexes that stretched across continents. How many humans are there? Velthari asked carefully. On Earth alone? About 12 billion. Velthari's report sat on Ambassador Kethavar's desk for 3 days before anyone bothered to read it. When the ambassador finally did, his reaction was exactly what Velthari had expected. 20 billion humans? Kethavar laughed, showing his sharp teeth. Impossible. We observed their fleet strength. One small ship. If they had such numbers, where are their massive fleets? Where are their world-spanning cities? I saw the images myself, Velthari insisted. Their cities are enormous. Their technology is more advanced than they initially showed us. High Counselor Morden entered the room, his tall frame filling the doorway. What are you two discussing? Velthari believes the humans are hiding their true capabilities, Kethavar said with amusement. He thinks they have 20 billion people. Morden's expression didn't change. Even if true, numbers mean nothing without proper military organization. One of our dreadnoughts could destroy a dozen primitive human worlds. But what if they're not primitive? Velthari asked. Then why send only one small ship for first contact? Morden countered. Why not impress us with their strength? Every species we've encountered has tried to appear powerful during initial meetings. These humans seem almost eager to appear weak. That was exactly what worried Velthari, but he couldn't find the words to explain why. The next morning brought a surprise. Captain Lee Taman requested permission to visit the Nexari flagship. Not for negotiations, but for what he called reciprocal cultural exchange. Interesting, Morden mused. Very well. Let's see what we can learn about these humans. Captain Lee arrived with a small team. Dr. Park Sojin came to examine Nexari medical facilities. Engineer Kim Woobin wanted to study their technology. Lieutenant Choi Yuna expressed interest in their defensive systems. Private Bei Jin-ho tagged along as security. Velthari watched them carefully as they toured the massive ship. The humans seemed genuinely impressed by the size and scope of Nexari technology, but he noticed things. The way Lieutenant Yuna's eyes tracked the placement of weapon systems, how Engineer Kim asked specific questions about power distribution and structural weak points. The way Dr. Park examined their medical bay with the focus of someone cataloging capabilities, not just admiring them. During lunch in the officers' dining hall, the conversation turned to military history. Several Nexari commanders bragged about their conquests, describing how they had overwhelmed primitive species with superior firepower and tactics. Fascinating, Captain Lee said politely. What kind of resistance did you typically encounter? Minimal, Commander Veltok boasted. Most species surrender after we demonstrate our technological superiority. Those who resist are quickly overwhelmed. How quickly? Lieutenant Yuna asked. Days at most, sometimes hours. The humans exchanged glances that Velthari didn't like. Dr. Park asked, what was your longest campaign? The Zephyrian resistance lasted nearly 2 months, another commander replied. They had some clever tactics, but primitive weapons. They couldn't match our firepower. 2 months, Private Bay repeated thoughtfully. That's not very long. For us, it was an eternity, the commander laughed. We prefer quick, decisive victories. Engineer Kim leaned forward. What if you faced an enemy with comparable technology? How would your tactics change? The commanders looked at each other uncertainly. That has never happened, Veltok admitted. Our technology is superior to all species in this region. But hypothetically, Captain Lee pressed gently. We would adapt, Morden said firmly. The Nexari military is highly trained and disciplined. Of course, Captain Lee agreed. I'm sure your soldiers are very brave. Something in his tone made Velthari uncomfortable. It wasn't mockery exactly. More like the way someone might compliment a child's drawing while knowing they could do much better themselves. After lunch, Lieutenant Yuna asked to observe Nexari combat training. In the ship's gymnasium, elite Nexari soldiers demonstrated their fighting techniques. They were skilled, disciplined, and deadly by any reasonable standard. When they finished, Commander Veltok turned to the humans. Perhaps you would show us some human combat techniques. If you wish, Lieutenant Yuna said simply. What happened next would stay with Velthari for the rest of his life. Yuna moved like water flowing around obstacles. Every motion was precise, economical, devastatingly effective. She demonstrated techniques that used an opponent's strength against them. Methods for fighting multiple enemies simultaneously, ways to turn common objects into deadly weapons. But it was the way she moved that truly disturbed Velthari. There was no wasted energy, no dramatic flourishes. Every technique was designed for one purpose: killing efficiently. When she finished, the Nexari soldiers stood in stunned silence. "Where did you learn this?" Commander Veltok asked. "Basic training," Yuna replied. "Every human learns these techniques. Every human." "Well, there are variations based on individual aptitude and specialty," she conceded. "But yes, the fundamentals are universal." Private Bay stepped forward. "Would you like to see some of our demolitions training?" Before anyone could object, he produced a small device from his pocket. With quick practiced movements, he assembled what was clearly an explosive charge. "This is a standard breaching charge," he explained casually. "We use them for mining, construction, obstacle removal." "Very versatile." Velthari watched in horror as the young human handled military-grade explosives like toys. The precision, the casual familiarity, the clear expertise all pointed to one conclusion. This wasn't mining equipment. It was warfare material. "Is this safe?" one of the Nexari engineers asked nervously. "Perfectly safe until I activate it," Bay assured him with a cheerful smile. "Then it can punch through 3 meters of reinforced steel." Later that day, Dr. Park gave a presentation on human medical capabilities. What she described as basic field medicine sounded like advanced combat trauma surgery to Velthari. She spoke casually about treating radiation poisoning, severe burns, massive blood loss, and catastrophic injuries. "We've had to become very good at emergency medicine," she explained. "Exploration can be dangerous work." "What kind of dangers?" Ambassador Kethvar asked. "Oh, the usual," Dr. Park replied. "Equipment failures, hostile environments, aggressive wildlife, occasionally hostile people." "Hostile people?" "Pirates, raiders, territorial disputes. Nothing too serious, but it keeps us busy." The way she said it made Velthari's skin crawl. She was describing warfare like it was a minor inconvenience. That evening, Captain Lee requested a private meeting with High Counselor Morden. Velthari was allowed to attend as an observer. "I want to be completely honest with you," Captain Lee began. "We've enjoyed your hospitality, and we've learned a great deal about your coalition." "And what have you learned?" Morden asked. "That you're powerful, well-organized, and successful," Captain Lee said diplomatically. "You've clearly built something impressive here." "Indeed. And now it's time to discuss your integration into our coalition." Captain Lee was quiet for a moment. "Before we proceed, I should clarify something about human capabilities." "Oh?" "When you asked about our worlds, I told you we had settlements on several worlds." "That was true. What I didn't mention is that several in human terms means 43 inhabited systems." Morden's eyes narrowed. 43? "When you asked about our population, I said we had people on various worlds. I should have been more specific. Earth alone has 12 billion inhabitants. Our total population across all systems is approximately 21 billion. The silence in the room was deafening. "When you asked about our fleet," Captain Lee continued, "I showed you the Aegis Dawn. It is indeed an exploration vessel. What I didn't mention is that it's one of approximately 8,000 ships in our exploration fleet alone." Velthari felt the blood drain from his face. 8,000 ships just for exploration? "How many ships do you have total?" Morden asked carefully. "Military vessels? About 40,000, give or take a few hundred. But most of those are assigned to home defense or colony protection. We generally only send exploration ships to investigate new contacts." 40,000 warships. The entire Nexari Coalition Navy had maybe 3,000 vessels. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" Morden demanded. Captain Lee looked genuinely puzzled. "You never asked. You seem to have already formed opinions about our capabilities based on what you observed. We didn't want to appear aggressive by correcting your assumptions. You deliberately deceived us." "No," Captain Lee said firmly. "We answered your questions truthfully. When you asked about our worlds, we told you about our worlds. When you asked about our people, we told you about our people. You made assumptions about what our answers meant." Velthari realized the humans had been completely honest. They had just allowed the Nexari to interpret their honesty in the most non-threatening way possible. "What exactly are you saying?" Morden asked slowly. "I'm saying that humanity would prefer peaceful coexistence to any other option," Captain Lee replied. "We've had enough of war. We know what it costs. We'd rather be friends than enemies. And if we refuse friendship?" Captain Lee's expression remained calm, but something changed in his eyes. "Then we would be very disappointed. War is expensive, destructive, and wasteful. It should always be the last option, but it is an option." "High Counselor," We are a species that survived ice ages, global plagues. The emergency session of the Nexari Coalition Council lasted 18 hours. Felthari sat in the observer gallery, watching as military commanders and political leaders argued about the human revelation. 40,000 ships, Admiral Kresh repeated for the 10th time. It's impossible. Where would they hide such a fleet? Perhaps they're lying, suggested Commander Veltok, trying to intimidate us with false numbers. High Counselor Morden sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Our long-range sensors show no signs of a massive fleet in this sector. Could they be using some kind of stealth technology? Asked Admiral Kresh. Possible, the chief science officer replied. But hiding 40,000 ships would require technology far beyond what we've observed. Ambassador Kethvar leaned forward. I believe they're bluffing. Think about it logically. If humans truly had such military power, why would they negotiate? They could simply demand our surrender. Unless, Morden said slowly, they actually prefer peace as they claim. The room fell silent. The idea that a militarily superior species would choose negotiation over conquest was foreign to Nexari thinking. Impossible, Admiral Kresh declared. Power exists to be used. These humans are either weak or lying. Either way, we should proceed with standard integration protocols. And if they resist, asked a junior counselor. Then we make an example of one of their colonies, Morden replied. A limited strike to demonstrate our resolve. Once they see the futility of resistance, they'll surrender like all the others. Velthari wanted to speak, to warn them that everything he had seen suggested this was a terrible mistake. But junior diplomats didn't address the full council without permission. The debate continued through the night. By morning, the decision was made. The humans would be given a standard ultimatum: submit to coalition authority or face the consequences. Captain Lee Taemin received the message while having breakfast in the Aegis Dawn's small dining area. Felthari watched through the communication link as the human captain read the formal demand for surrender. The captain's expression didn't change. He simply nodded once and looked up at the screen. High Counselor Morden, he said calmly, I understand your position. However, I must respectfully decline your offer. This is not an offer, Morden replied coldly. This is a demand. Submit to coalition authority or face military action. I see. Captain Lee was quiet for a moment. In that case, I request that you allow us 72 hours to evacuate non-essential personnel from our nearby colonies. Absolutely not. You have 24 hours to surrender unconditionally. Then I'm afraid we have a problem, Captain Lee said softly. High Counselor, I want to be very clear about something. If you attack human civilians, there will be consequences. Severe consequences, Morden laughed. You're in no position to make threats, human. That wasn't a threat, Captain Lee replied. It was a warning. There's a difference. The transmission ended. On the Nexari bridge, the mood was confident, almost celebratory. The humans had refused to surrender, which meant the coalition could proceed with their standard conquest protocol. Target selection? Admiral Kresh asked. New Sol, Morden decided. Their mining colony in the Kepler system. 50,000 inhabitants. Large enough to make an impression, small enough to be manageable. Velthari felt sick. New Sol was a civilian colony, home to families, children, people whose only crime was being human. Recommended strike pattern? The tactical officer asked. Limited bombardment, Admiral Kresh replied. Target infrastructure and government buildings. We want survivors to spread word of our power. The fleet began moving within the hour. 12 Nexari warships, led by the Eternal Dominion, departed for the Kepler system. The human ship Aegis Dawn followed at a distance but made no attempt to interfere. The journey took 2 days. During that time, Velthari tried several times to speak with his superiors about what he had learned aboard the human ship. Each time he was dismissed. You're letting primitive propaganda affect your judgment, Ambassador Kethvar told him. These humans have convinced you they're more dangerous than they actually are. It's a simple psychological manipulation. When they arrived at New Sol, Velthari got his first look at a human colony. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Clean cities nestled in green valleys, solar collectors gleaming on hills, transport ships moving peacefully between orbital stations and the surface. No military installations, the tactical officer reported. No weapons platforms, no defensive fleets. Civilian target confirmed, Admiral Kresh announced. Beginning bombardment in 10 minutes. The human ship Aegis Dawn moved into communication range. Nexari fleet, Captain Lee's voice came through clearly. You are targeting a civilian population. This is your final opportunity to withdraw. Surrender now or watch your people die, Morden replied. There was a long pause before Captain Lee spoke again. Very well. But remember, High Counselor, you chose this. The bombardment began at exactly 14-hour ship time. Nexari plasma cannons reached down from orbit, striking carefully selected targets. Government buildings vaporized in brilliant flashes. Power stations exploded in showers of sparks. Transportation hubs crumbled into smoking ruins. But the weapons were precise, surgical. This wasn't meant to be a massacre. It was a demonstration of power, designed to break the humans' will to resist without causing excessive casualties. On the surface, emergency sirens wailed as 50,000 people fled to underground shelters. Velthari watched through the tactical displays as small figures ran through the streets, seeking safety that didn't exist. The bombardment lasted exactly 1 hour. When it ended, New Sol was crippled but not destroyed. The colony would survive, but it would take years to rebuild. Casualty estimates? Admiral Kresh asked. Approximately 8,000 dead, 15,000 wounded, the tactical officer reported. Infrastructure damage at 60%. Acceptable, Morden declared. Signal the humans. Tell them this is what happens to those who resist coalition authority. But when they tried to contact the Aegis Dawn, they received no response. The human ship hung in space, silent and motionless. Are they ignoring us? Admiral Kresh asked. Unknown. They are not responding to any communication attempts. Velthari stared at the image of the human ship on the main screen. Something was wrong. The Aegis Dawn looked different somehow. Its running lights had changed configuration. Its hull seemed to have shifted, revealing sections that hadn't been visible before. High Counselor, the sensor operator called out urgently. I'm detecting massive energy signatures from the human vessel. What kind of energy signatures? Unknown, but they're unlike anything we've seen before. Suddenly, the human ship began to change. Hull plates shifted and rotated, revealing weapon ports that had been completely hidden. Sensor arrays emerged from concealed compartments. The ship that had appeared to be a simple exploration vessel transformed before their eyes into something sleek, deadly, and obviously military. It's a warship, Admiral Kresh breathed. It was a warship all along. Impossible, Morden snarled. How did our sensors miss that? They didn't miss it, Velthari said quietly. The humans hid it. They made us see what they wanted us to see. Captain Lee's face appeared on the communication screen without them initiating contact. His expression had changed completely. The polite diplomatic mask was gone, replaced by something cold and implacable. High Counselor Morden, he said, you have attacked a civilian population. You have killed innocents. You have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. Your threats don't frighten us, human, Morden replied. 1 ship against 12 is suicide. 1 ship? Captain Lee smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Who said anything about 1 ship? Space around them began to shimmer. What had appeared to be empty void suddenly filled with ships, dozens of them materializing as if from nothing. They were larger than the Aegis Dawn, more heavily armed, and they surrounded the Nexari fleet completely. Stealth technology, the sensor operator whispered. They were here the whole time. How many? Admiral Kresh demanded. 50, 60, 70 ships. Still counting. Velthari felt terror wash over him. The humans hadn't lied about their fleet strength. They had simply hidden it better than anyone thought possible. You attacked New Sol, Captain Lee continued. 50,000 civilians lived there. 8,000 are now dead. 15,000 are wounded. You did this to prove a point about power. We did what was necessary, Morden said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Yes, Captain Lee agreed, and now we will do what is necessary. The lead human ship, larger than any Nexari vessel, moved forward. Its hull was black as space, covered in weapon ports that glowed with deadly energy. This is Fleet Admiral Park So-jin of the Human Defense Force, a new voice announced. All Nexari vessels will surrender immediately or be destroyed. Admiral? Velthari realized that the gentle doctor he had met was actually a military commander. How many of the humans had been hiding their true roles? We outnumber you, Admiral Kresh protested. Do you? Admiral Park asked mildly. More ships appeared. Hundreds of them, emerging from stealth in perfect formation. The space around New Sol filled with human warships. each one bristling with weapons that made Nexari technology look primitive. Final count, the sensor operator reported in a voice barely above a whisper. 3. The human marines who boarded the Eternal Dominion moved like ghosts through the ship's corridors. Velthari watched from the bridge as they systematically secured each section with an efficiency that spoke of extensive practice. These weren't exploration crew members pretending to be soldiers. These were professional warriors who had been hiding among the civilians all along. Private Bei Jin-ho, the cheerful young marine who had demonstrated mining explosives, led the boarding party. But there was nothing cheerful about him now. His movements were precise, deadly, economical, every step calculated to maintain tactical advantage. Secure the bridge, he ordered his team. Take prisoners for questioning. Medical teams tend to the wounded. Velthari noticed that even in the midst of combat, the humans followed strict rules. They helped injured Nexari soldiers, treated prisoners with professional courtesy, and used only the minimum force necessary to secure their objectives. High Counselor Morden sat in his command chair, staring at nothing. Admiral Kresh was dead, killed when a human precision strike destroyed the tactical station. Ambassador Kethvar had been wounded when debris from a console explosion hit him in the head. High Counselor Morden, Private Bei said formally. You are under arrest for war crimes against civilian populations. War crimes? Morden laughed bitterly. We were demonstrating our power. Standard procedure. Perhaps for you, Bei replied. Humans have different standards. Dr. Park Sojin entered the bridge, but she wasn't the gentle medical officer Velthari remembered. Her uniform bore admiral's insignia, and she moved with the authority of someone accustomed to command. Casualty report? She asked briskly. Nexari fleet is completely disabled, Bei reported. Minimal casualties on our side. Most of their crew survived the attack. Good. We'll need them for testimony. Admiral Park turned to Velthari. You're the cultural observer, correct? The one who spent time on our ship? Yes, Admiral, Velthari replied quietly. Then you understand why this happened. It wasn't a question. Velthari nodded slowly. You tried to avoid this. You wanted peace like we did, but some lessons can only be taught through experience. Admiral Park looked at the ruined bridge around them. Your people chose to attack civilians. That decision has consequences. What kind of consequences? Morden asked. Admiral Park studied him with cold eyes. Complete and total dismantling of your military capability, trials for war crimes, reparations to the families of everyone killed at New Seoul, and a permanent human presence to ensure this never happens again. You can't do this to us. High Counselor. 12 hours ago you commanded the most powerful military force in this region. Now you have no fleet, no weapons, and no leverage. What exactly do you think is preventing us from doing whatever we choose? The truth of it hit Velthari like a physical blow. The entire balance of power had shifted in a single engagement. The Nexari coalition, which had dominated this region of space for centuries, had been reduced to helplessness in minutes. Captain Lee Taemin appeared on the bridge, but he had changed as well. His exploration uniform had been replaced by a military dress uniform that showed his true rank, Fleet Admiral. The polite diplomatic captain had been a role he was playing. Status report, Admiral Park? He asked. Nexari fleet neutralized. Prisoners secured. Ready to proceed to Phase 2. Phase 2? Velthari asked. Admiral Lee looked at him with something that might have been pity. We're going to visit every Nexari military installation in this sector. They're going to surrender their weapons and submit to inspection. Any facility that refuses will be destroyed. That's impossible. We have hundreds of bases, thousands of ships. Had, Admiral Lee corrected gently. Past tense. Your fleet is currently being surrounded by human forces throughout the sector. The operation began the moment you opened fire on New Seoul. Admiral Park activated a holographic display that showed the surrounding star systems. Velthari watched in horror as red dots representing Nexari installations winked out one by one, replaced by blue indicators showing human control. How? Morden whispered. We've been tracking your military positions since our first contact, Admiral Lee explained. Your people were very helpful during the cultural exchange. They shared detailed information about your fleet dispositions, base locations, and defensive capabilities. We simply used that information to plan a comprehensive response. Engineer Kim Woobin had been gathering intelligence. Lieutenant Yuna had been analyzing their defensive systems. Dr. Park had been studying their medical capabilities to understand their physical limitations. Every friendly conversation had been a debriefing session. "You used us," Ambassador Kethavar accused weakly. "We gathered publicly available information that you freely shared," Admiral Lee replied. "The difference is that we actually listened to what you told us." The communication system activated, showing dozens of screens from across Nexari space. Military commanders, planetary governors, and fleet admirals all reported the same thing. Human forces had appeared without warning and demanded immediate surrender. "Nexari Command, this is Admiral Jawei of the Human Defense Force," one screen showed. "Your orbital defense platforms have been disabled. Surrender immediately or they will be destroyed." "Nexari 7th Fleet, this is Admiral Kim Ji-hoon. You are surrounded and outgunned 50-1. Stand down or be destroyed." "New Carthage military installation, this is Admiral Song Min-jung. Your weapons are targeted. You have 60 seconds to surrender." The reports continued. Every major Nexari military asset was under human guns. The humans had planned and executed a sector-wide operation with precision that spoke of months of preparation. "When did you plan this?" Felthari asked. "The contingency plans were drawn up during our first conversation," Admiral Lee admitted. "We hoped we'd never need them, but hope isn't a strategy." "You were planning to attack us from the beginning." "No," Admiral Lee said firmly. "We were planning to defend ourselves if you attacked us." "There's a significant difference." Admiral Park received a communication from one of her subordinates. "Admiral, New Carthage is refusing to surrender. They're powering up their heavy weapons." "Understood. Carry out the deterrent strike." On the tactical display, Velthari watched as the New Carthage system appeared. The massive military installation orbited a dead world, bristling with enough firepower to sterilize planets. It was one of the Nexari coalition's most powerful fortresses. The human fleet surrounding it consisted of only 6 ships. But when they fired, the space fortress simply vanished. Not destroyed in a dramatic explosion, not slowly dismantled. It simply ceased to exist as if it had never been there at all. "What kind of weapons do you have?" Morden asked in a voice barely above a whisper. "The kind that end wars quickly," Admiral Park replied. "We learned long ago that decisive action saves lives in the long run." Over the next 6 hours, Velthari watched the systematic dismantling of Nexari military power. Those bases that surrendered were occupied by human forces but left intact. Those that resisted were eliminated with weapons that defied understanding. The humans didn't boast about their technology or explain how their weapons worked. They simply used them with surgical precision to remove any threat to civilian populations. "How many ships do you actually have?" Admiral Kresh's replacement asked over the communication system. "Enough," Admiral Lee replied simply. But Velthari was beginning to understand the scope of human military power. They weren't just facing a few hundred ships. This was a small portion of a fleet that stretched across 43 star systems. The humans hadn't sent their military to intimidate the Nexari. They had sent the minimum force necessary to accomplish their objectives. "Sir," Private Bay reported, "we're receiving surrender signals from the remaining Nexari installations. Total compliance across the sector." "Casualties?" Admiral Park asked. "Minimal. Most Nexari forces chose surrender over destruction. Total civilian casualties, 0. Admiral Lee nodded approvingly. "Good. Begin Phase 3. "What's Phase 3? Velthari asked with growing dread. "Justice," Admiral Lee said simply. The humans began transporting Nexari leadership to a location they called New Sol Station. It was a massive facility that had been constructed in orbit above the bombed colony, apparently built in the few hours since the attack. Velthari found himself in a detention cell with other Nexari officials, but it wasn't like any prison he had ever seen. The cells were comfortable, clean, and the human guards were polite and professional. They were provided with adequate food, medical care, and legal representation. "This is how you treat prisoners?" Ambassador Kethavar asked their guard. "This is how we treat everyone," the human replied. "War crimes don't justify more war crimes." The trials began immediately. But these weren't the show trials or summary executions that Velthari had expected. These were careful, methodical legal proceedings conducted according to human law. Each Nexari official was assigned a human lawyer to defend them. Evidence was presented systematically. Witnesses testified about the attack on New Sol. The entire process was broadcast throughout Nexari space so everyone could see what was happening. The defendants are charged with war crimes against civilian populations, the human prosecutor announced. Specifically, the deliberate targeting of non-combatants for the purpose of intimidation. High Counselor Moore. 6 months after the trials, Velthari stood in the rebuilt Central Plaza of New Seoul, watching human and Nexari workers collaborate on the final construction projects. The colony was now more beautiful than it had been before the attack, but it carried scars that would never fully heal. A memorial wall listed the names of the 8,000 civilians who had died in the bombardment. Velthari visited it every morning before beginning his work shift. He had helped carve many of those names into the black stone, learning each person's story from the survivors. Minjun Park, aged 7, who had been playing in the Central Park when the bombs fell. Sujin Lee, aged 34, a teacher who had died shielding her students. Taehyun Kim, aged 56, an engineer who had stayed at his post trying to maintain the shields until the very end. Each name represented a life cut short because of decisions made in distant meeting rooms by people who saw them only as numbers on casualty reports. Good morning. Velthari, Dr. Park So-jin said as she approached the memorial. She came here every morning too, though she never explained why. Good morning, Admiral, Velthari replied. Just doctor today, she corrected gently. I'm here in my medical capacity. Dr. Park had returned to her role as chief medical officer, though everyone knew she could resume her military command at any moment. Many of the humans on New Seoul served dual roles, ready to transform from civilians to soldiers if the need arose. How are the integration programs progressing? Velthari asked. Better than expected, Dr. Park replied. Most of your people are adapting well to the new governance structure. The new governance structure was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the human occupation. Rather than installing military governors or puppet regimes, the humans had simply integrated themselves into existing Nexari society. Human advisors worked alongside Nexari officials. Human judges sat on courts with Nexari colleagues. Human teachers worked in Nexari schools. It wasn't conquest in any traditional sense. It was more like peaceful absorption, but in reverse. Instead of forcing the Nexari to become human, the humans were teaching the Nexari to become better versions of themselves. Velthari, a voice called out behind him. He turned to see Captain Lee Tae-min approaching. The human still wore his admiral's insignia, but he moved with the relaxed bearing of someone no longer at war. Admiral Lee, Velthari greeted him. How is the cultural exchange project coming along? Lee asked. Velthari managed a small smile. The real cultural exchange, you mean? After the trials, the humans had implemented what they called mandatory cultural education. Former Nexari military officers were required to live and work alongside the species they had conquered. Velthari had been assigned to New Seoul, but other Nexari were working on Zephyrian worlds, Altarian colonies, and dozens of other planets that had suffered under coalition rule. The purpose wasn't punishment, though it often felt like it. The purpose was understanding. I've learned more about the 47 species we conquered than I ever knew during the conquest themselves, Velthari admitted. They're not primitive or inferior. They're just different. And what else have you learned? Dr. Park asked gently. Velthari was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts. That power without restraint leads to terrible things. That we called it civilization, but we were really just very sophisticated barbarians. And now? Now I'm beginning to understand what civilization actually looks like. The rebuilding of New Seoul had become a model for human governance throughout the former Nexari territories. Rather than destroying existing structures, the humans improved them. Rather than replacing Nexari culture, they enriched it. Rather than ruling through fear, they governed through example. Admiral Lee nodded approvingly. Would you like to see something? He led Velthari and Dr. Park to a transport that carried them to the orbital station above New Seoul. The station had grown considerably since the trials, becoming a hub for interspecies cooperation that stretched across the entire sector. In the main assembly hall, Velthari saw something that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. Representatives from all 48 species that had been part of the Nexari coalition sat together as equals, debating policy and sharing resources. The New Seoul Accords, Admiral Lee explained, a mutual defense and cooperation treaty between all the species in this region, including the Nexari, Velthari asked in surprise. Especially the Nexari, Dr. Park replied. Your people have valuable knowledge and skills. You just need to learn to use them constructively instead of destructively. At the center of the assembly, Velthari recognized several former Nexari officials who had completed their community service. They were now serving as advisors and cultural interpreters, helping to bridge the gap between former conquerors and the conquered. Ambassador Kethvar was there, leading a discussion about trade route optimization. High Counselor Morden worked with Zephyrian engineers on infrastructure projects. They looked different. Humbled, perhaps, but also somehow more alive than they had been during their days of military rule. How did you know it would work? Velthari asked. We didn't, Admiral Lee admitted. But we had to try. The alternative was to become like you used to be, ruling through force and fear. That's not the kind of future we want to build. But some of your people must have wanted revenge. After what we did to New Sol, Dr. Park's expression darkened slightly. Many did. There were calls for complete destruction of the Nexari coalition. Some wanted us to glass every Nexari world as an example to other potential threats. Why didn't you? Because that's not justice, Admiral Lee said simply. That's just another form of barbarism. They were interrupted by an announcement over the station's communication system. All representatives to the main assembly hall. Priority 1 emergency session. In the assembly hall, Admiral Park Sojin was addressing the gathered representatives. Her expression was grim. We've received a distress signal from the Cygnus sector, she announced. The hegemony of worlds has launched a massive invasion. 3 species have already fallen. They're requesting aid under the New Sol Accords. The hegemony of worlds was a military alliance from the Galactic Core, known for their aggressive expansion and brutal subjugation of conquered peoples. They were everything the Nexari coalition had been, but larger and more ruthless. How many ships do they have? Asked the Zephyrian representative. Initial estimates suggest approximately 60,000 vessels, Admiral Park replied. The assembly hall fell silent. Even at the height of their power, the Nexari coalition had never faced anything like that. Recommendation? Asked the Altarian delegate. Full deployment, Admiral Lee announced as he entered the hall. All member species will contribute according to their capabilities. Human Defense Force will provide primary military support. All due respect. Admiral, the former Commander Veltok said. But 60,000 ships is beyond even human capabilities. Admiral Lee smiled. Commander, during our first meeting, you asked me how many ships humanity had. I told you about 40,000. That was our exploration and colony defense fleet. The implications of that statement hit Velthari like a physical blow. How many ships do you actually have? He asked quietly. The Human Defense Force maintains approximately 200,000 active vessels, Admiral Lee replied casually, plus another 100,000 in reserve. 300,000 ships. The number was so large it was almost meaningless. Velthari tried to imagine a military force of that size and failed. But that's just the military fleet, Dr. Park added. Human merchant marines, exploration services, and civilian vessels bring our total space-capable fleet to approximately 800,000 ships. 800,000, Velthari repeated numbly. The hegemony won't be expecting organized resistance, Admiral Lee continued. Most species they've encountered surrender after token resistance. They've never faced a coordinated defense by multiple allied species. How long until you can respond? Asked the Nexari representative. Response fleets are already in position, Admiral Park announced. Operation began 6 hours ago when we received the distress call. Of course it had. The humans didn't wait for meetings and debates when people needed help. They simply acted. Over the following days, Velthari watched as reports came in from the Cygnus sector. The human response was everything he had come to expect. Overwhelming, precise, and absolutely devastating to the aggressor, the hegemony fleet, which had conquered 3 worlds in as many days, found itself surrounded by human forces that seemed to appear from empty space. Their advanced technology proved useless against human weapons that operated on principles the hegemony couldn't understand. But what impressed Velthari most wasn't the military victory. It was what came after. Unlike the Nexari coalition's brutal conquest methods, the humans liberated the conquered worlds and immediately began reconstruction efforts. Unlike their treatment of the Nexari leadership, hegemony war criminals faced swift trials and harsh sentences. Unlike their integration of former Nexari territories, hegemony space was placed under direct human administration until stable governments could be established. Why the different approach? Felthari asked Admiral Lee during one of their regular conversations. Because the Nexari could be reformed, Admiral Lee replied. You were conquerors, but you were